Hello, this is Justin Williams with the Wolfpacker Podcast. I'm joined today, as always, by co-host Matt Carter. We've got a few different things to break down in this podcast here. We've got some men's basketball topics, of course, the news that Shaquille Moore is transferring, and plus we're going to do our takeaways of the NFL draft. One NC State player was drafted in the 2021 NFL draft, and a couple more signed as undrafted free agents, so we'll talk a little bit more about that, and also maybe a little bit of a preview for the 2022 draft. But before we get too far into this episode, this podcast is brought to you in part by JFQ Lending. As we blitz into 2021, JFQ Lending wants the Wolfpacker.com members to take advantage of historically low mortgage rates. JFQ Lending has a Better Business Bureau A rating with over 2,000 reviews. They work with top lenders and do the hard work of finding the best deal for you. If you're curious whether refinancing your mortgage is a good decision, visit jfqlending.com today. That's jfqlending.com. And of course, for our listeners at home, please remember to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast wherever you listen to us. We're on the Apple Podcast app, Spotify, Google Play, pretty much everywhere you listen to podcasts. Plus, you can always listen to us on thewolfpacker.com. While you're there, take advantage of our promo code PACK60. That's promo code PACK60 for a free 60-day trial on all of our premium content, news, and analysis. And you can always watch this podcast on our YouTube channel. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel while you're there and give this video a thumbs up. Okay, Matt, let's jump right into our topics. I think let's start with the NFL draft because I think that's the most recent things on our mind, although I guess these were both newsy events in the NC State world of athletics that kind of happened over the weekend here. But we'll start with the good, and then we'll get to maybe a little bit of the bad or maybe forecasting what else is going on. But we'll start with football. NFL draft, no surprises really. Alim McNeill, the NC State player taken in the 2021 NFL draft, he was selected by the Detroit Lions with the 72nd overall pick in the third round. I know the mock drafts that we had seen had him going anywhere from the third to fourth round. It was always expected that he was going to be a second-day guy. I know that some sites, particularly Pro Football Focus, were very high on McNeill. I believe Alim McNeill was the second interior defensive lineman on PFF's big board. Some others had him a little bit lower, maybe as a projected fourth-round pick. But all in all, I think McNeill has to be pretty happy with his selection there towards the top end of the third round, so he didn't have to, get deep into the third round and question whether or not he was going to be a third-day guy. But let's start with him before we get into the undrafted free agents here. I guess, Matt, just kind of your initial reactions to McNeill going with the Lions. Were you surprised at all with where he was picked? And I know I've seen some of the draft reactions here over the last day on our website at thewolfpacker.com. You can see what they're saying about Alim McNeill and the Detroit Lions' selection of him in the early third round. I think some people had some problems with the Lions taking him at that position because they had just picked an interior defensive tackle in the second round. But other than that, I think the consensus across the board is clear that McNeill's a guy that's going to translate to the league and be an effective interior defensive lineman wherever he landed. So the problem wasn't with him, it was maybe with the Lions' selection of him. But what were your thoughts, Matt, with his placement and maybe a potential fit with the Lions?
Yeah, I have to readily confess I know nothing about the Detroit Lions football roster, but it did sound like from what the ESPN analyst, I happened to be watching. I'm sorry, I was watching ESPN, but it was our coworker Ryan Tice was watching NFL Network and sent me some of the quotes from Daniel Jeremiah, who noted that the head coach for the Detroit Lions had talked about wanting to get some interior defensive tackle. So this was clearly a position of need for Detroit. From what I gather, the other defensive tackle, more of a three technique, which is Alim more of a nose, so it's kind of a good match, a good, complementary match. So I with the NFL draft, you never know who's going to pick who. I mean, once you get past the first round, it's a crapshoot, and the mock drafts are interesting. They're fascinating. They maybe be able to give you a general idea of what to expect. They were pretty sharp on Aleem. I'd say about 95% of them had him as a third round pick. So pretty clearly they were on it with Aleem. So he went where you thought he would go, but in terms of who was going to pick him, that's a total guess. You never. I mean, half the time these NC State guys get drafted by teams they never even talked to during the draft process. So it's all about finding one team that likes you. And so, I think the important thing for Aleem is that top 3 rounds are generally viewed as potential starters, are generally viewed as locks to make the team. And that's so for Aleem, he's going to get a good opportunity because at the 3rd round, the Lions are going to make sure that he gets every opportunity to prove himself and develop. And so I think that's the important thing is it's kind of, you want to be one of those top 3 round picks.
Well, it looks like he's going to be stepping into a defensive tackle room up in Detroit that, we could see Aleem compete for some time on the field as soon as this season. I mean, he's going to be joining a fellow rookie in Levi Onwuzurike from Washington. He was the rookie that was drafted in the 2nd round by the Lions with the 41st overall pick. But again, I think it goes back to the emphasis from the franchise that they just wanted to build their interior, mission accomplished there. I think some of the third-party spectators that are reviewing the draft or giving these draft grades, if they didn't know that the Lions were trying to restock the arsenal there in the interior, maybe they'd have a problem with picking back-to-back interior linemen, but I'd imagine that's going to be a big part of his competition out of the gate. He's got a couple other younger defensive tackles up there in Detroit, 3rd-year players John Atkins and Jashawn Cornell from Georgia and Ohio State, respectively. A few more guys. There's a veteran, Nick Williams from Samford. He's a 7-year pro up there, but pretty young position group overall. And obviously the Lions had a pretty high pick in the draft. They weren't very good last year, and they're kind of in a rebuilding mode. So we'll see what Aleem's able to do up in Detroit, but good for him to get that draft selection. Let's talk about a couple of the other guys that were fringe draft candidates. I know that they were hoping to have their names called towards the end of the 3rd day. Unfortunately, they did not, but they found landing spots shortly after as expected. It was tight end Kerry Angeline and offensive guard / center Joe Sculthorpe. Kerry Angeline ends up signing with the Arizona Cardinals as an undrafted free agent, and Joe Sculthorpe goes to Atlanta as an undrafted free agent. I think the interesting connection there that jumps out to you right out of the gate is the fact that Sculthorpe's going to Atlanta where Dwayne Ledford was recently hired as Atlanta's offensive line coach back in January, and he's going to be a familiar face because he was Sculthorpe's offensive line coach in Raleigh for his first 3 seasons of college football from 2016 to 2018. So Matt, other than the obvious connection there in Atlanta, what were your thoughts of those 2 guys signing as undrafted free agents to their respective destinations? I know we had talked to multiple draft scouts that, it was kind of unlikely that their names were going to be called by the end of the 3rd day, although you never know what surprises could have been in store. But it sounds like, with the situation that they're in, they're going to have their opportunities to play their way into playing on Sundays and making NFL rosters. So just your thoughts on how it ended up for Angeline and Sculthorpe.
Yeah, again, it's tough to say. I do think, for Joe Sculthorpe, having that familiarity helps. It also, he was recruited to NC State by Des Kitchens, who's now also on the Atlanta Falcons offensive staff. So he's got 2 guys that can probably, of course, Des Kitchens was the offensive coordinator for NC State in 2019, which was Joe Sculthorpe's first full year as a starter at NC State. So got 2 guys that can vouch for him, who are familiar with him. Maybe that helps him kind of get into get his foot in the door a little bit with the competition battle. I don't know are these undrafted free agent training camp invites, or are they I forget what they're called. Some of these guys get what, in essence, tryouts. And you get signed to try out to get a chance to go to training camp. So it'd be interesting. I would suspect they're more the traditional training camp invites. And of course, Arizona has always been a fan of NC State. Undrafted free agents, Rob Quist is the one that comes to mind recently. Their general manager is an NC State guy, Steve Keim, former NC State football player. So it's not unusual to see NC State guys get an opportunity with the Arizona Cardinals. I think the case of Kerry Angeline, the pro day number probably hurt him a little bit. But we knew that, Angeline's about being 6'7" and exceptionally sure-handed. Whether or not he's athletic enough for the NFL and can he be physical enough as a blocker is going to determine his ability to play at the next level. I think Goldthorpe got a chance because I think he can snap. He can be a center. His numbers at pro day were actually pretty good. So I think as Goldthorpe proved to the Falcons he can be a center, there's always value. Every team in the NFL keeps a couple of guys that can play that guard center role in at least reserve. That's why Ted Larson has been playing 10 years now in the NFL out of NC State in a similar role. So I think I wouldn't be shocked. I think he's got a chance. So, but, it's good for them because actually, the misnomer is, you want to get drafted. Once you get past the 6th round, you're better off not being drafted. So that way you can really, really probably 5th round, but especially after 6th round. At that point, you can kind of, the teams that are going to try to sign you are looking to bring in guys at a certain position. In the 7th round, they're just picking who's ever at the top of their board in the draft, whether they need them or not. And so at that point, you got teams that are very sincerely interested in you. If you have a good agent, you know which teams are good possibilities in terms of making the team. So there's always I think with the fans, they're like, they didn't get drafted. But the truth is, if once you get past the 6th round, you're probably better off not being drafted. So therefore, you can be a little bit selective about who you join and maybe improve your chances of making the roster. The key is making smart decisions and picking teams that have potential openings at those positions. Again, full disclosure, I don't like the Atlanta Falcons because they compete against my Carolina Panthers, so I certainly don't follow the Atlanta Falcons, and I do not know their roster situation, and I certainly don't know the Arizona Cardinals' roster situation other than J.R. Sweezy was a starting offensive guard this year, former NC State player. So I don't know their odds and, whether they're long or pretty decent or what have you.
Well, like you, I pull for the Carolina Panthers, although these days it's tougher than it was back in 2015 when things were going so well for the Panthers. This is not a Panthers podcast, so we won't digress there. And like you, I don't know the exact offensive line situation that Sculthorpe is walking into in Atlanta, so I'm not even going to try to break that down. But it's a little bit easier to look at the tight end situation in Arizona. I pulled up the roster here. There's 3 guys on the current Arizona roster. 2 of them are veterans, one with 5 years of experience, and Daryl Daniels played college ball in Washington. He's 6'3", 256. And then there's Max Williams. He's a 7-year pro. He played college ball at Minnesota. He's 6'4", 252. The third guy, Ian Bunning, is 6'7", 1 year of experience from California. So maybe Angeline provides a little bit of size to that room. We'll see. Obviously, he's got some pass catching ability, and the game has changed in the NFL to the point where a big, tall, pass catching tight end can be a game changer. So we'll see what kind of impressions he can make this summer. But like you, I think Sculthorpe's versatility, it's kind of the name of the game once you get to that level. If you're not one of the no-brainer guys, what can you do? Can you be a contributor on special teams? Can you be a guy that's going to be versatile for us if we reserve a bench spot for you or we put you on the roster? Can you provide us some much-needed depth? I think Sculthorpe checks a lot of those boxes, so we'll see. But congrats to all 3 of those guys. And I think it kind of is a good segue into looking ahead. We don't have to get too much into the nitty-gritty here, Matt, but 2022, just from what it looks like today, May 3rd in 2021, looks like that's going to be the really loaded draft class for NC State in terms of there is pro talent on this current roster. There was pro talent on the 2020 roster for NC State, but it just seemed like the way it worked out with the timelines and everything, a lot of the high-end guys, or a lot of the guys that are going to be draft picks, are probably going to end up going in 2022 or 2023. I guess the number one name that jumps off to me is Ikem Ekwonu, Icky, the left tackle, who's probably going to be a first-rounder when it's all said and done, just because of the tape that he's put on in his 2 years at NC State so far at left tackle. And I know PFF is really high on his grading, his ability. I know he was, I think, the second highest graded run blocker in the ACC last year, behind the Virginia Tech offensive lineman that was drafted in the first round, Darrisaw, Christian Darrisaw, if I'm not mistaken. Don't want to mistake his first name. But Matt, your impressions on, am I kind of onto something here, that 2022 is kind of the year that NC State fans should be circling in terms of the NFL draft?
It's tricky because of the way the roster is set up. You just don't know who's going to stay, who's going to leave. We're talking but there's no question that the bulk of the NFL talent on this team are kind of that junior, sophomore class. Now, they're all juniors and sophomores again. So there's a great amount of flexibility, and they have a great amount of leeway in what they choose to do. But I think Ekwonu certainly rates highly, and I also think Peyton Wilson, with another healthy year, is a guy that would rate very highly for the NFL draft. So those are the two that stand out to me. I could see an Isaiah Moore shooting up the draft with a very good year. Some of those receivers, I think, will have opportunities. I don't know how high they will be draft picks, but they'll have opportunities. I can see Grant Gibson getting a good look with a good year. So and that's just off the top of my head. Yeah, I'm sure there are others. So, yes, I do foresee, it's a question we kind of tackled in the roundtable that we did Friday. If you want to check that out, it was premium content. Where we kind of went into it a little bit more details. Off the top of my head, I would put the over and under at 4.5 for the next year draft class. But again, that a lot depends on health and what kind of guys like Ekwonu or Icky is available in the draft next year. There was a huge piece written on him by the Athletics, Bruce Feldman, which really raved about him, and you got to see what the other offensive line coaches in the ACC thought about him, and it's pretty eye-raising. So, but he's just a sophomore again. He gets to repeat that sophomore year, so he could theoretically play another 3 seasons of college football at NC State. So whereas under normal circumstance, you would be pretty sure he'd be looking to leave after this next season as a junior. He could potentially play a couple more years. And so that's what makes it hard to predict. And I'm not a fan of these way too early 2022 mock drafts, as the case may be this year. There've been a lot of way off predictions when it comes to that. So we'll see how it plays out this fall. In the case of Ekwonu, I think he's got to prove that he can be a consistent pass protector at left tackle. I know some people think he might be a guard at the NFL level. So if that is proved to be true, that will affect his draft stock. In case of Peyton Wilson, he's obviously got the medical history. So there's a couple things to consider as well.
Well, I don't want to bore you too much with too much draft talk. I guess for what it's worth, we did see that Bleacher Report has Ekwonu number 7 on their way too early 2022 NFL draft big board. So, you don't know if it's going to be accurate or not, but it's at least a good sign if your name's coming up in a top 10 at this point. Shows that you're onto something, and we'll see what he can put on tape heading into 2021 this fall, because NC State will need a good contribution from him with their offensive line, especially with the loss of a Joe Skolthorpe and a Justin Witt from last year. But let's change the topic to basketball, and another great reason why you should use that promo code PACK60 for a free 60-day trial on thewolfpacker.com. If you were a premium member of thewolfpacker.com, you would have known for months that the future of Shaquille Moore in Raleigh at NC State was very much in question. Multiple times since the season ended for the Wolfpack back in March. Early on, there was some guesses that Shaquille Moore was going to move on, and then it became more of a 50-50 situation, and then the buzz and the rumors around Raleigh kind of died down for a little bit, and then all of a sudden this past week they ramped back up, and sure enough, on Friday we saw that Shaquille Moore had entered the transfer portal, not the draft, and that's a big loss for NC State. That's going to be their third departing transfer this summer. The first was Braxton Beverly, who was a senior who only had 1 year of eligibility remaining. He's going on to Eastern Kentucky. And then another freshman, Nick Farrar, he transferred to College of Charleston but did not play much his freshman season. But Shaquille Moore's a guy that was a part of the rotation early on in his freshman season at NC State and could have been a pretty big rotational piece for the Wolfpack in 2021-2022, but he decides to move on. So, Matt, just kind of your initial reaction to the news. I know it wasn't really surprising for us because we kind of knew it was coming, although when we originally thought it was coming, then it kind of went away. So you didn't really know what this situation was until Shaquille Moore officially posted on his social media pages that he was indeed moving on. But just kind of your thoughts on, he was a guy that showed a lot of talent in year one that I think a lot of NC State fans were surprised to see what he was going to develop into, but maybe just a matter of, look, NC State's going to have a lot of talent at the guard position next year, and maybe Shaquille Moore was kind of looking around saying, where exactly is my role in this backcourt rotation? Just kind of your thoughts on the immediate impacts it makes for this Wolfpack backcourt heading into 2021-2022, Matt.
I actually don't think it's going to be that bad of a deal because I think I'm a fan of defined roles on a basketball court. I think the more you can define the roles and that the guys fit the definition of the role that you defined them for, the better off you are. Part of NC State's late season successes last year was, of course, the schedule. We can't deny that. But I also think that the fact that Thomas Allen got lost for the year after Devin Daniels had gotten lost for the year, Kevin Keith switched to the big lineup with Funderburk and Bates, Helms, Sebron, and Hayes. Yeah, for the most part, the lineup was defined. There was one flip late in the year where Beverly went from being the 20 minutes off the bench guy to back into a starting role. But, the guys understood their roles. They knew their roles. They were playing to what their roles were, and it was working. And so I'm a fan of having that kind of definition, if you will, of what a depth chart should look like. And I think, honestly, in a weird way, Shaquille Moore at the person might help with that. Cam Hayes is going to be a point guard. Breon Pass is probably going to be the primary backup point guard. That Thomas Allen and Casey Morsell are going to be your primary shooting guards. That you got Darion Sebron and Taquavion Smith coming in, and Jericho Holmes as kind of your three, your wing forward options. Now you got some, Greg Gant and Ernest Ross can kind of be your power forward guys. You got Manny Bates in the post with some backup options behind him. And so everybody now knows, I think, kind of what the role defined. There's still some further clarification, particularly between Morsell and Allen and maybe Taquavion Smith coming in, how that's going to work out. But I like having defined roles, and maybe one less guard to that equation helps with that. So, of course, the $1 million question is, how does NC State respond to that? Do they go out and try to get another guard, in which case everything I just said is null and voided and mute? Or do they look at some other options, or do they just bank it and put it into the 2022 class? Deontay Green, power forward from Asheville, is going to be taking an official visit to NC State on June 4th. And right now, and there is a scholarship available for him. If you were to fill it with a transfer, unless it's a grad transfer who's going to be a senior, you don't have a scholarship to give him. So not to say he's coming to NC State, but the point being that you know, it would help with your numbering situation if you knew you had some scholarship to give. So it'll be interesting to see what they do there. I don't necessarily see a pressing need to have a 13th guy on scholarship. Kevin Keatts traditionally does like to carry a full roster of 13. So, I don't know how drained the portal is now after everything that's gone on. So, we'll see how it plays out.
Well, NC State has options, and I don't think there is a right or wrong option at this point in time sitting here in May. I mean, I think the elephant in the room is what's going to happen with NC State's IARP case. Of course, it's from the NCAA allegations of the Dennis Smith Jr. saga that has seemingly gone on for years now. Apparently, there's going to be a decision on the IARP ruling some point over the next year. Could be as soon as this summer, in which case NC State could be facing penalties if they're indeed ruled to be guilty in this situation. Could be a scholarship loss, could be a fine, could be a combination, could even be a postseason ban. We'll see. I think that would be egregious. I think you and I are both kind of on the same thought process of what the ruling should be, but you never really know what's going to be the case when the NCAA is involved, and particularly with this new entity, IARP, that we really don't have a body of work from IARP to show how they typically rule in these scenarios. So that's one thing to kind of watch in terms of if there's the possibility that there could be a scholarship loss from this IARP case. It's going to be interesting to see how NC State ends up using that last scholarship vacancy. I mean, I'm kind of with you in the sense that if NC State was going to lose a player that was active in its rotation from last season, it's probably for the better that it was in the backcourt. As I was saying before, Mr. Big Shot over here, Matt Carter, received a phone call that he had to take and had to pause the podcast for. I think if you're going to lose a player of Moore's caliber on this NC State roster, it's probably for the best for the Wolfpack that it was in the backcourt, because you look at this roster, there's plenty of talent in the backcourt. They've got a lot of guards. They have returning guards. They have two very capable guards coming in the 2021 class, and Breon Pass and Terquavion Smith, two guys that I know Kevin Keatts and this NC State program is very high on. They're going to be very familiar with the program, and they're going to be vying for time as soon as they step on campus. And then plus you have the transfer in Casey Morsell coming in from Virginia, who I know didn't have the shooting performances that he really expected up in Charlottesville, but maybe a new fresh start, new beginning in Raleigh is exactly what the doctor ordered for Morsell, a guy that, certainly on paper is a capable guard that could immediately contribute. He was a top, 55 recruit in his respective recruiting class according to Rivals. But then you look at this front court, and I think there's some questions. You've got Manny Bates and you've got Jericho Helms, and those are two guys that are going to play a lot. They're going to be starters throughout the season as long as they stay healthy. But then after that, you just have to wonder how the new additions are going to work out. You've got Greg Gant coming in from Providence, another guy who is a top 55 recruit in the 2019 class, North Carolina native, went up to Providence and played limited minutes, didn't really produce a lot, so we'll see what a new start, new beginning looks like for him. And then, of course, you've got your highest touted recruit in the 2021 signing class, Ernest Ross, coming in as a taller forward that may be playing a little bit from the perimeter, a little bit from the inside. We'll see if he's a conventional power forward or not once he gets to Raleigh. But there are more question marks in the front court, and there are certainly more questions as it relates to the depth of the front court as opposed to the guard rotation. So if NC State is going to go fill up the scholarship spot, at least from this perspective, it would make sense to go find maybe a wing or another forward. The grad transfer situation would make a lot of sense if there was a candidate that fit that bill in terms of you could get the best of both worlds. You could get somebody that could contribute immediately next season and also have that scholarship vacancy for the 2022 class. But we'll see how it all unfolds. I think there's just a lot to consider at this point, and from the bigger picture, Matt, it's just kind of more of signs of more to come in off seasons in the future, because college basketball fans just kind of need to get used to this reality that this is what the off seasons are going to look like now. You're going to go into the off season thinking that you're going to have, a set amount of returning talent. You're probably going to need to go ahead and make the deal with yourself and mentally prepare that you're going to lose a portion of those guys to the transfer portal. You're going to probably bring in some new guys from the transfer portal. And, you look at it sitting here a couple months ago, you're looking at NC State's roster thinking, well, there's going to be a lot of returning pieces back. It's going to at least have it's going to have a nucleus of returning talent. Not that it doesn't anymore, but you're looking at 7 returning guys on scholarship from last season, which was a little bit different of a picture than you maybe thought at this time last month. So, but again, compared to the rest of the ACC, compared to the rest of Division I basketball, I mean, that's seems about average or maybe a little bit above average in terms of, returning talent and lack of turnover from last year's roster. I mean, is that kind of how you see it, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I'd have to look at the other roster to know for sure. But to your earlier point, the hard part with the grad transfer is you need somebody anybody that's going in as a grad transfer is obviously looking for a situation to play and start and get major minutes.
Right.
And it's hard to find where you could do that for NC State, except maybe that power forward position where you already have Greg Dent coming in. You do have your most touted recruit coming in and Ernest Ross. So anybody that comes into that, and I'll throw out a name, I have not heard this name mentioned with NC State at all. So let's be clear about that. It could be. I just don't know. I had not heard it, but I'll throw out Boston College's Stephon Mitchell. Stephon Mitchell was originally looking to go pro. Now he decided to do the transfer portal. He's a clear power forward. He could come into NC State and obviously start, but he's going to want to start wherever he goes. And that's just what makes it hard for it to go out and get a grad transfer, because you got to find somebody that understands that there's competition. And that's not necessarily what they're always looking for. So it's tricky. You mentioned the IR situation that does loom. I personally just kind of lean towards, I agree with you. I lean towards, if you're going to get a guy, get a power forward. I think you're covered on a lot of other spots, including the wing, to be bluntly honest. You still have Seabron. Quavion Smith can play wing. Helms can play the 3. He proved that last year. You can even go small guard, 3-guard lineup with Allen and Morcell and Hayes or Pass or Smith. So you have a lot of options there. To me, the one weakness is to be blunt, low post depth. You just don't know who you have behind Manny Bates with DeWanna and Jalen Gibson. Again, issue there. Can you find somebody that, if there's a true center, you're going to find somebody who wants to transfer and play behind Manny Bates and get 5 to 10 minutes a game? I mean, that's easy. That's just not how the transfer portal works. So could you find a power forward? That might be the avenue to take. But you're right. This is the new normal. I'm the old man that's screaming, "Get off my lawn." I get that, but I do think that I even think, quite frankly, some of those who have advocated very strongly for this type of transfer system have been surprised with how it's set up. I've seen some of them kind of caveat it. Well, it won't be like this going forward. This year was just unusual. Once everybody sees what it's like, it'll die down. And I'm here to tell you, it ain't going to die down. It's just going to be like this. It is, that's you and I talked. That's basketball now. How many high schools do a lot of these players end up going to? How many traveling teams do they end up going to? In the last couple of years, you've had 2 NBA stars who have signed huge contracts. I'm sure they were the maximum of contracts you can sign. Basically tell their team, sorry, I know I signed, not even sorry, hey, I know I signed that contract with you recently and you're paying me the maximum dollars, but I'm not playing for you anymore, so trade me. and they got traded. And that's just kind of the way it works in basketball. They hop around. It is a constant. People talk about freedom of movement. This is what you get in particular with the sport of basketball. It's just how it works from the prep level, how it works in the NBA, and now it's going to be how it works in college basketball. So you're right. Got to get used to it. You got to adjust, and the coaches are going to have to figure out how to earn their salary and this. And I think John Rothstein, if I'm pronouncing his last name right.
Rothstein, but yeah.
Rothstein, yeah. Like that, the days of a program are no more. It's year to year. So if you're looking for the old school, stable program, churning it out year in, year out, those are no more. It's a year to year. Now, some schools are going to be better positioned to handle it year to year than others, but that's just the reality. It's a year to year deal now.
Well, we wish Shaquille Moore the best wherever he ends up going. His destination is yet to be announced, but I'm sure he'll have many suitors looking for him because he was a pretty solid player in the ACC when he was able to find the court. And he'll always be remembered by NC State fans for a particularly eye-popping highlight in NC State's ACC opener against North Carolina at home last year in December. NC State beat UNC in Roy Williams' last ever appearance as head coach of UNC in PNC Arena. So a nice little departing gift or retirement gift, if you will, from NC State and Kevin Keatts and that team. But that was that dunk over Walker Kessler. That'll be one that I remember for a long time. And I bring it up, A, because it was a great highlight, but B, I'm looking at this picture now, which was the picture that we used to give out the report that NC State guard Shaquille Moore was entering the transfer portal. But in that picture, there are 9 players pictured, and almost half of them, 4 of them, are entered the transfer portal and have already picked their new destination. There's Walker Kessler and Garrison Brooks from UNC. They were both in the transfer portal. I believe they already have their destinations as well. Shaquille Moore dunking the basketball and Braxton Beverly looking in the background. 4 of those 9 players transfers. So just 2021 in college basketball, that's the way it is. But it was fun to watch Shaquille Moore because he was an athletic freak. He still is. Not that he's losing his athletic freakness, but was fun watching him in PNC Arena in the weird COVID season that we had. But that will do it for us for this week's edition of the Wolfpacker Podcast. Please remember to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast wherever you listen to us. We're on the Apple Podcast app, Spotify, Google Play, everywhere you listen to podcasts. Plus, you can always listen to us on thewolfpacker.com. While you're there, please be sure to use promo code PACK60. That's promo code PACK60 for a free 60-day trial on all of our premium content, news, and analysis. We already gave you plenty of reasons during this podcast why you should use that promo code and become a premium subscriber to thewolfpacker.com. And plus, on our last episode of the Wolfpacker Podcast, we talked a lot about football recruiting, what's going on in the 2022 class, and there's a lot of good recruiting information and stories up on our website right now. So take advantage of that deal. Use that promo code PACK60. Plus, you can always watch this podcast on our YouTube channel. While you're there, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and give this video a thumbs up. Lastly, please follow us on social media. You can follow our main account on Twitter at The Wolfpacker. That's at The Wolfpacker on Twitter. Give us a follow. You can follow me on Twitter at Justin H. Will, and give us a like on Facebook, NC State Wolfpack, on thewolfpacker.com. So for Matt Carter, this is Justin Williams, and this has been the Wolfpacker Podcast.